Do you know Photoshop? If so, you may know the free transform command. It's not new. However, it reigns to this very day as one of the most powerful commands in all of Photoshop. This one command, free transform, allows you, get ready for this, to move, scale, flip, rotate, skew, distort, and warp one or more layers at a time. And you can do so without a lot of menu dipping because everything's right there. It's just a bunch of dragging and pressing a few modifier keys, as I'm about to explain. All right, transformations inside Photoshop. Now, if you've never worked with these things before, things like scale, rotate, and so forth, or you've only worked with them a little bit, I am going to be coming in hot and heavy here because I really want you to approach things in the proper way. All right, for starters, we've got two commands under the edit menu. This is just kind of a diagram. Let me show them to you for real. I'll go to the edit menu and I'll drop down to free transform. See it right there? I'm just showing you those two commands on their own. Free transform and then transform. Transform brings up a submenu full of a lot of different options. Now, if you've never done this before, if you've never scaled a layer, for example, you might think, all right, this is where I go. I have to go there. Isn't scaling pretty common inside Photoshop? And the answer is yes. Scaling down sampling is very common. Up sampling, not so common because then you end up having to fudge pixels. But we'll discuss that a little bit. But really, the point here is, why is it squirreled away? Why is it so hard to get to? Well, and same with rotate and all this other junk. Well, that's because that's not the way to work. So let me show you in my diagram. We got those two commands, right? We got free transform right there, which I'm putting in bold because it's a good one. And then transform, which brings up this submenu. Again, notice I've made that bold as well. That's in that same submenu we saw just a moment ago. This is the order in which the commands appear. Again, we'll repeat the last transformation, by the way. Tends to be useful. And then all this other stuff, not useful. What am I talking about? Scaling and rotating? That's not useful? Well, here's what I mean. Just kind of put them out of your mind. So the bold white commands are the ones you want to know about. The other ones you can get to surreptitiously. There's all kinds of different ways to scale a layer, as we'll see. But also notice, free transform, I mentioned this at the outset, free transform has a keyboard shortcut of Ctrl-T. And again, on the PC that is, and again, that is, repeat that last transformation. That has a keyboard shortcut of Ctrl-Shift-T. Now, you see it listed in the menu. If I go back here, you'll see that it's listed as Shift-Control-T. Don't say it in that way, by the way. That's just because it's flush right, going in the wrong direction, essentially. You really say the Control key first, then Shift, and then Alt, Command-Shift option on the Mac, if you want to sound smart. That is to say. Anyway, speaking of the Mac, the keyboard shortcuts are Command-T and Command-Shift-T. All right, so that's all you need to know. Just remember that keyboard shortcut, because once you do, all you need to do is press Control-T, Command-T on the Mac. It doesn't matter if you want to scale, rotate, or otherwise transform a layer. Then notice, I'm not sure this is the best infographic I've ever created, but I think it tells the story. After you've chosen free transform, after you press Control or Command T, you enter the free transform mode. You'll see what that looks like in just a moment. At which point, all you have to do is right click and you'll gain access to all those same commands once again, except for again. And if you want that, you can just press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac. All right, now for the fun stuff. I'm going to swap over to this image right here, this extraterrestrial flying saucer, whatever it is. Notice that it is selected over here in the layers panel. So that's the layer we're going to be working on. Yes, you can scale, rotate, and otherwise transform multiple layers at a time if you like. I'm just going to stick with this one layer. It is important that the layer that you want to work on is selected. All right, now I will just do what I said I was going to do. I'll press Control-T, Command-T on the Mac. There is no reason to go to that menu. Actually, I'll show you one more thing. I'll go ahead and press the escape key to get out of there. Assuming that the rectangular marquee tool is selected, which is a great default tool inside Photoshop, the reason is because then when you right click, you get all the good stuff. Even though it doesn't look like a big menu, one of the good things that we have right here is free transform. So you can work that way too, if you like, but that command's only going to be there if one of the selection tools is active. Anyway, we're going to see we're now in what's known as the free transform mode. One more thing, I'm going to do that again because I want you to see, notice up here in the options bar that we have a bunch of options, but notice the second I press Ctrl T, Command T on the Mac, the options change. So we have X and Y options. Those are coordinate positions, by the way. By default, that's the center of the selection, by the way, of the selected region of this bounding box is what it's called. More on that in a second. And then, so, if you like coordinates. And then we have width and height values, and they're linked together by default. Then we've got a rotate value right here. Those are all very useful if you want to work numerically. Then we've got these less useful guys, skew, horizontal skew, that is a vertical skew. And then I wanted to show you one more thing here. We've got warp. We'll see that in just a moment, which allows you to, bend the layer, let's say. And then we've got this guy, interpolation. Now, this is very important. If you see it, you don't see it when working with smart objects. More on that later. However, if you do see it, then you want this thing not to be set to bicubic automatic. Don't set it to nearest neighbor either. You'll get really super jagged results. That'll look terrible. The one you want, here's the problem. Bicubic automatic is going to sharpen the image if you make it smaller. So if you downsample it, if you reduce the number of pixels, and it's going to go with bicubic smoother if you make the layer bigger, which you generally don't want to do, but sometimes you have to. But anyway, and that's upsampling pixels, making more pixels, and it then smooths them out. That's just not the way to work. Adobe for years was recommending these two approaches. What it does is it means you end up with over-sharpened images, especially if you really super reduce them. The best way to go, take my word for this, this is it. You're going to get beautiful blended pixels is bicubic. So that's what that should be set to, none of the other ones. Now then, having just gotten on this path to distraction so far, here's the good stuff. All of this stuff is good, but it's getting gooder. And so notice we have a bounding box. That is that rectangle. It is the size of the contents of the layer. Notice over here in my layers panel, you can see a thumbnail for the flying saucer. It's a rectangle. The reason we're seeing more than that is because I've assigned a vector mask to it. And see what the vector mask looks like when I hover over that mask? Did you see it? Just there for a second. It appeared red. There it is. It appeared red. So it's masking that flying saucer. And then we have these square handles. They're square in shape. And there's 8 of them. So the 4 corner handles, and then there's one at the top. Oh, it's 2 on either side. You know what I mean. 1 on either side for 2 total, and then 1 at the bottom. 8 in all. I just want you to note what these things are called. And so we're just going to run through just a few random modifications here. So we're still in this one mode here, this free transform mode. And so I'll right click, let's say, and this is a good use for right clicking. Scale through perspective. You can do all that using keyboard tricks. And I'll show you what I mean. And dragging the handles and dragging outside the bounding box and so forth. In any event, warp, you might want to use that because that gets you into the warp mode, which is a special mode. Or you might want to take advantage of these rotate guys. Like if you want to turn the image upside down for real, then rotate 180 degrees is going to do that. And then you have these flipsters right there. So I could choose flip horizontal, which is a little subtle because the flying saucer is kind of symmetrical. But then I could right click and choose flip vertical. And none of this is destructive. Flipping isn't destructive anyway because it just puts pixels at different locations. But nothing you do is destructive within the free transform mode, not till you accept your changes, that is to say. That's when the pixels actually get rewritten. All right, now let's say I just decided, what the heck? Oh, I want you to notice that we have a couple of layer effects over here, including this gradient overlay effect, which is making the bottom of the spaceship a little more orange. I just want to emphasize the coloring. And so that's going to kind of go bonkers as I right-click again and choose warp. Now, I could also click that warp icon up there in the options bar. Notice all the options changed, speaking of the options bar, so that we're seeing this warp guy right here. And I could say, hey, I want to arc it. And it is going to, I was telling you about that gradient overlay. That's why it's looking all orange. That is not how it's actually going to look. However, if I were to press the enter key, I'm not going to, it's going to look different, but I don't want to ruin things at this point. Bend, I'll just go ahead over to the bend value here and change it to a negative value in order to bend the ship upward like so. And then let's say I right click again and I choose flip vertical in order to just continue to make a mess of this object. Now, the reason I've done all this, part of it, just the general educational vibe that I'm trying to pass along, but also everything I've done is undoable. So you have multiple undos here in the free transform mode. So if I press Ctrl Z, Command Z on the Mac, I'm going to continue to undo all those operations. Control Shift Z or Command Shift Z on the Mac will replace all the operations there. Now I want you to see that we have 3 icons up here in the options bar. This guy is just going to get rid of any of the warping, like so. So the ship's still upside down, but it's no longer warped. Then we have escape, which just escapes out and doesn't apply any of your transformations. And then we commit. So it's escape, by the way, the ESC key. And then we, the enter key. Will commit your changes. As soon as you press that enter key, it's possible that you're going to rewrite every pixel in the image, especially if I go back to that arc that we saw before. And now I'm going to show you. I will go ahead and commit it by pressing the enter key. I want you to watch that orange. Notice that, well, I guess I have to press the enter key a couple of times because one of those options was stuck up there. But notice that the orange got reapplied. So basically the layer effect doesn't always preview correctly. Anyway, this would be a destructive modification. It's just plain destructive. I was going to say kind things about it. It's on an independent layer, so that's good. The other layers weren't hurt, but this one got totally rewrit. And basically the idea is you get one swing at it with free transform. You can do as much inside the mode as you want to, but once you apply it, don't go reapplying it. Don't go, wow, you know what? I really want this beautiful thing that I've created for this banana. It's floating in space. I want to make it smaller. Nope. Should have done that before, in which case just undo. So now it's one undo to undo the entire free transform because you applied it. You get it? So now it's just the one undo. And now go back, press Control T again, Command T on the Mac, and do whatever it is you want to do in one free transform session. All right. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's see some more tips, shall we? Or lower levels. Okay, so I'm diagramming now. Here we've got the bounding box, which is always going to look like a rectangle. And, well, once you start rotating it, it's going to be at an angle and stuff. And we saw it get all warped. But it's at the initial, right at the beginning of free transform, it's going to be a rectangle. And then we've got the square handles, which are side handles, corner handles, and so forth. All right, so what do you do with them? Well, you can just work without any keys pressed. And I mention this because Photoshop is keyboard sensitive. There's a lot of shortcuts going on, and a lot of its behavior is modified when you press a modifier key, such as Control-Shift-Alt on the PC or Command-Shift Option on the Mac. But as long as no key is pressed, then there are 4 different things you can do. You can drag a handle, any one of the handles, by the way, square handles, to scale proportionally. Big asterisk right there. That's default behavior. This behavior happened, I don't know, about a half decade ago. Well, a few years anyway. Not everybody loves it. Basically, the idea is proportionally means the same percentage width and height, right? And that's going to happen by default because Adobe did some, basically Adobe sees how some people work if you let it. If you let Photoshop, communicate that to click data to Adobe, then they go, oh gosh, most people scale proportionally. So I guess that's what will make the default behavior, even though we haven't done that in any of our other programs. Illustrator should still have to press the Shift key to scale proportionally. So thus ensues what I believe to be a lot of confusion, but I do want to document how things work. So that is proportionally. If you don't like that, by the way, I'm going to press Control K, Command K on the Mac. I told you I was just going to be like throwing stuff at you here. That brings up the Preferences dialog box. Another good keyboard shortcut, by the way. Control K, Command K on the Mac for preferences. YK, well, long story. Anyway, it just is. How's that? So notice this checkbox right here. Well, see, the thing is, you can search the preferences now. So like if you're going, oh, I wish this would behave the way it used to, and I don't want to scale proportionally all the time. So under proportion, no, I can't find anything. Okay, fine. And I'll enter scale, and that's going to do the UI scaling, which is no good. Funny thing, I swear to you, Adobe does not want you to play with this option. They gave it to you, but they don't want you to find it. It's right in front of you. By the way, it's hidden in plain sight, that is. It's this. Use legacy free transform. If you turn on that checkbox, you will not scale proportionally by default. That's just something to bear in mind. So if you don't like that setting, you can turn it off right here. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm just going to go ahead and document things the way they work. So there it is again. By default, that's how it works. Drag slightly outside the bounding box, sort of in this region here, let's say, to rotate. See that in a moment. I'm going to show all this to you. Drag inside the bounding box to move it around, if you want, and then drag well outside, not inside a well, but drag well outside the bounding box to apply. Red exclamation point, because I hate this feature. All right, so it's just a gotcha. It is not a convenience feature at all. All right, let's do it. Let's do all those things, shall we? Control T, Command T on the Mac. Always the first step. That was me snapping my fingers. I apologize if that seemed a little rude. Now I'm going to drag a handle. Notice it scales proportionally. And another way if it's not behaving that way, it's because the width and height values are not linked together. So notice the link is on right there. Anyway, even if it's a side handle or top or bottom handle, they have talked about not working that way. Like if you drag a side handle, right? You want it to squish it. But anyway, that's the way it works. And what else? Put your cursor outside, slightly outside the boundary, not too far, and drag, and you will rotate. And you will get a little heads-up display. That's nice. In order to tell you how much rotation you're applying, in case you're curious. Drag inside the bounding box to move the thing on the fly. And then, and by the way, these move values can be really useful. Not to continually digress, but let's say you want to nudge this over 200 pixels to the right, but you don't want to have to press the right arrow key 100 times, let's say 200 times it would be actually, or shift along with the arrow key, like what would that be? That'd be 20 times. That's still a lot of pressing. You could just do this. You could just click after the value there and enter plus 200. It's one way to work anyway, and that will nudge it over 200 pixels. So just, the X and Y values can be your friends. Anyway, drag inside to move. And then what did I say? Move your cursor well outside the bounding box. Still looks like an arrow. Look at it. Look at it right now. There it is, a rotate cursor. There it is, an arrow. Click, and it applies the darn thing. Just rewrote every single pixel on my flying saucer. I am not feeling very appreciative about that. I don't like that feature at all. You should have to press the enter key. You should know what you're doing. It should be a conscious decision. Anyway, that's how it works. I'll undo because I don't want to make a mess of my flying saucer. All right, so that's how it works if you're just dragging around, right? What if you're adding the shift key? What happens when you press the shift key? Now you can press and release the shift key. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Gets pretty interesting, and that's one of the great things about Photoshop is these tricks work on the fly. So you could start your drag, then just press and hold the shift key, or start by pressing the shift key and dragging, and then release the shift key. Up to you. Up to you. The more you use it, the better you get. All right, so what happens? We'll drag a handle, once again, one of these handles, to scale without constraint, again, by default. Basically, that legacy checkbox thing that I showed you, that's just gonna switch the behavior. So what the asterisk is going to be the opposite. It's going to do the opposite. What I'm trying to say is you'd press the shift key to scale proportionally, and you would not to drag without constraint. Anyway, whatever. Drag outside the bounding box to rotate. This is with the shift key pressed in 15-degree increments. So multiples of 15. That would be 30 degrees and 45 degrees, all the way up to 90 degrees, 180 degrees is a multiple, and so forth. Drag inside the bounding box to move horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. So in multiples of 45 degrees. So in other words, When scaling, shift is not a constraint. When rotating and dragging and moving, shift is a constraint. I'll make sense of that. Anyway, here we go. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Control T, Command T on the Mac. The first step always, of course. And now I will drag. Notice, this is what I was talking about. The shift key doesn't have to be down at the beginning of your drag. So here I am. Scaling proportionally, and you can see that the width and height values are linked into alignment with each other, and they both read, in my case, 85.15%. But watch what happens if I drag some more, and then I press the shift key to make it all smushed, like so, and now so that removed the constraint. Now I release the shift key, and I go back to the constraint, the proportional ship, which is great. So I can just go back and forth. Let me show you one more thing. It gets even more interesting. It can be a little confusing, but watch this. I'll go ahead and shift. You can shift drag, by the way. You can press the shift key, in other words, before you start dragging. And now it's all squished. Notice with about 30% height, 115%. Now I will not press the shift key this time, and I'll drag. These become the new constraints. This becomes the new aspect ratio of our command module, or whatever it is. Looks like something out of the Apollo mission. And so that, so it's now squished. It's now squished, and it's now going that those are the new proportions. All right. How about that shift key with the rotate? I'm going to press the shift key at the beginning, and I'll rotate 15 degrees. 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and so on. But let's say I release the shift key for a second, and I'll try to find a good value, like how about 50 degrees right there? I want to nail it so I can show you this. All right, now I'll press and hold the shift key again, and now it's 15 degrees from 50. So it could be 45 degrees, 30 degrees. No, I'm lying. I'm a big liar. That's not how it's working at all. Let's see this. Let me try this. I bet I will be proven right about something. Okay, now it's 50 degrees. Did you see that? Now I'll press the shift key while I drag 65 degrees. So it added 15. So 80 degrees now. Do you understand what I mean? Now it's 15 degrees from the last place you left it. 35 degrees, 20 degrees, and so forth. So each time you can end up establishing a new proportion, a new base camp. All right, now I'll drag this guy around. As soon as I press the shift key, I'm going to constrain it to a horizontal drag like so, or a vertical one. If I get near it, it's right. No, this is a 90 degree. This is a 45 degree drag. Kind of, where did I start with this darn thing? Let's say I want to drag it vertically. Then I would press the shift key and start dragging it down like so. All right, so it's generally speaking, shift dragging is for vertical or horizontal drags. All right, well, I did a lot that time around, didn't I? I'm going to press the escape because this would really mess this up. Should I show you what I mean by that? Definitely, Deke, you should show. All right, so let's make this guy a little dinkus over here. He's small in with respect to the universe, and I'll press the Enter key in order to establish that change. And that I'll just go ahead and zoom in here. I want you to see that it looks nice and sharp. By the way, because I left that interpolation setting set to Bicubic, I didn't leave it set there. That's not the default setting. I put it there. And notice it looks nice, right? And that's because all the pixels have been rewritten in a very nice way. That's great if that's the only transformation you're going to apply. But watch this. Control T, Command T on the Mac. And now I'm going to make this guy bigger. Like so. I'll explain what key I'm pressing in order to pull this off in just a moment. But I'm making it way bigger, you can see. And then I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to apply that change. And now you can see it's wrecked. I have now wrecked this thing because I downsampled the image to make it nice and tight and crisp and everything looked great. And then I upsampled the heck out of the image and now it looks terrible. 2 free transformations in a row, or it doesn't matter if they're in a row. I could have done the first one on a Wednesday and the second one 3 years on a Thursday later. So it doesn't matter. In other words, just don't do it twice. Anyway, undo. That's nice. I can undo those terrible bad decisions that I made in life. All right, now What about the Alt or Option key? What happens when that key is pressed? Well, let's take a look, shall we? There's a couple of things that you can do. You can click to set a reference point, which is the origin of the transformation. There it is right there. There's the reference point. By default, it's in the center of the bounding box. And that's actually an asterisk for the next sentence. Drag a handle while the Alt or Option key is down to scale with respect to the reference point, which by default is in the center of the bounding box. All right, so let's check that out. This is going to be very useful, by the way, as can everything. All right, Control T, Command T on the Mac. And then notice we're not seeing that reference point. I'd like to see it. And so to see it, you go up to the options bar. See that thing right there, that little square, barely visible? That's a checkbox. And so what you do is you turn on the checkbox and up comes your reference point, which is right there in the center of the bounding box. Now it's always there. Let me show you. Let's say I move my cursor outside. I'm always, let's get with the program here. Let's see. Come on, Photoshop. There you go. Notice that it's rotating around that reference point. So it's rotating around the center by default. I'm not pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac. I'm just dragging with the rotate cursor. I'll undo that change so I can show you. Same thing happens whether or not you see that reference point. So I'll toggle it off, and then I'll drag again, and we're still rotating around the center. All right, so it's just, I think it's helpful to see it. I think at some point Adobe decided this made things too hard. I don't know. It's not hard. It's easy. All right, so watch this. I will just show you again with the rotate thing, just so you really get a sense of what's going on here. I'll move this thing, this reference point, over to the far left side of the spaceship, and now I'll drag like this, and you can see that I'm rotating around the left side of the spaceship. If I move this thing over to the right side, which you can do by dragging, you saw me drag it before, but you can also just press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click in order to set that point, and now drag, and you're dragging around the right side of the spaceship. Now make sure you're moving your cursor far away, because that'll give you smooth drags, smooth rotations. If you move it close, here, let's do this. This would be an insane way to work if you want to try this one out. Put the reference point really close to the edge and then drag really close to that reference point, and just tiny little movements are going to result in very upsetting modifications. Whereas don't start close. You don't want to start close. That was a bad idea. Start far away, as I was saying, and then you've got a lot of control. Hey, what about that scale thing I was mentioning? Well, let's undo a bunch of stuff here. How far back can we go? We should be able to go all the way back. Good. All right, let's put this guy back. Yeah, back in the center. I undid it. It's back in the center. All right, so let's say you want to scale the object with respect to its center. Well, if you just drag, I'll show you what happens normally. If you just drag, you scale with respect to the opposite corner point. Or if I drag the left side, with respect to the right side. Notice that? So there's always some point that's remaining fixed. I'll go ahead and undo those changes. What if you want the center to be fixed? You want all the handles, square handles, to move in kind with each other like so. Then you press and hold the Alt key as you're dragging. But if you release the Alt key, you go back to that opposite point behavior there, the opposite handle. And then if you press and hold the Alt key again, Option key on the Mac, then you go back to scaling with respect to the center. It's not really scaling with respect to the center. That just happens to be the default location of the reference point. So it is really scaling with respect to the center. However, you can change that. I'll undo that change, and I'll take this reference point and either drag it to a different location or press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click. And let's say I want the bottom of the spaceship to remain fixed. If I just drag, that's not going to matter, this guy right there, because I'm just moving this handle independently of the one over here. So the opposite handle is remaining in a fixed location. Whereas, I'll undo that, please. Then I'll press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac. And notice now all the handles are moving with respect to that reference point. The reference point is remaining fixed there at the bottom of the spaceship. All right, I don't want that modification, so I'm once again going to press the Escape key. Okay, but there's one more key left, and all the combos with that key. Here it comes. It is the control key here on the PC, or the command key on the Mac. What happens if you press that key in the free transform mode? Well, let's see. Two things right off the bat. Drag the top, bottom, or side handles, so this guy up here, this guy down here, or the one on the right or left-hand side, to skew, to slant the object. Whereas you can drag a corner handle, any of the four corner handles, to apply what's known as a 4-point distortion. Oh boy, what could this be? All right, so let's go ahead and press Ctrl-T, Command-T on the Mac. Something different for a change, and I'll press the Control key. Notice, I want you to see, if I move my cursor over, that's going to scale, right, over that top handle. But if I press and hold the Control key or the Command key on the Mac, I see a different cursor that's showing me the side-to-side thing, and that allows me to skew or slant if you prefer that layer. I'll go ahead and undo that. If you want to slant it, that was a horizontal slant. Notice that same goes for dragging the bottom. That's a Control or Command drag. And if you prefer, you can Control or Command drag aside in order to skew it vertically like so. And so that's slanting for you. That's what's up there. Whereas, undo that again, just less confusing if I don't pile these things on top of each other. You know, if you drag a corner handle, you're going to scale proportionally by default. Whereas if you press the Control key or Command key on the Mac and drag, you're just going to move that one handle. The side handles, the bottom and the side handles are moving, but the other corner handles are remaining fixed, and this is called 4-point distortion, by the way. And then, if I release the Control key midway, Command key on the Mac, oh, no, didn't do it. I thought I would keep that wackiness, but now I'll press and hold the Control or Command key again, and it'll end up looking like that. Now, if I just want to scale it, I can, and that would be with the Control or Command key not down. Escape out so I can show you a couple more things. We're getting toward the end of the list. We're running out of modifier keys, frankly. But let's see here. With Control or Command, which we saw those. What are we seeing those again for? What about if you add Shift? You can constrain the angle of the skew or the distortion. I'll show you that in just a moment. Might as well pile on these keys here. So this would be Control and Shift down, Command and Shift down on the Mac. What about if you add Alt, not Shift, just Alt along with Control or Option along with Command? That will skew or distort two opposite handles into or away from each other. Very cool stuff. Show it to you in a second. And then finally, remember there was a perspective? Do you remember one of those commands is called perspective right there? There's skew, there's distort, and there's perspective. Well, if you decide to pile on all the keys, this is every single key down, every single modifier key. Well, you know, the Windows key and the Control key on the Mac don't count. But what we've got is Shift and Alt along with Control, or Shift and Option along with Command for a perspective style effect. Oh my goodness, let's see what these look like. All right, Control-T, Command-T on the Mac. And then I will just go ahead and press the Shift and Control keys. This is Shift and Command on the Mac, and notice that I constrain the angle of my skew. So if I release the Shift key, I can do this number and go all over the place. But if I want to just skew it vertically like so, then I would press the Shift key as I drag, and you can see a little heads-up display telling you the amount of skew applied. If you just want to go horizontal, then you would Control-Shift or Command-Shift drag the top or bottom handle, and then you get a very nice skew instead of this number right here. So press that Shift key if you're looking for a controlled slant. A constrained slant is what I meant to say, but it's controlled as well. All right, how about with the corner handle? I'll press the Control and Shift keys and drag, and see how that constrains the angle of my drag to either vertical, like so, or if I get it down here, then I can do it horizontal instead. So the Shift key is a constraint, basically. It adds some goodness, I think. I'll undo that change. Let's see about the Alt and Control keys together. This would be Command and Option on the Mac. Look at me press the wrong keys. Let's try that again. There we go. This is Control and Alt down. That would be Command and Option on the Mac. And notice that I am moving the opposite handle either toward the handle I'm dragging or away from it like so. And this is happening with respect to that reference point. I'll undo that change. What happens if you do that same thing, Control and Alt, this time Command and Option, and drag a corner handle? Then you're going to do basically the opposite handle is going to move in kind, either toward or away, once again, with respect to that reference point. And then finally, undo that change. Let's see that perspective trick. You press Control Shift and Alt, Command Shift and Option, what I call mash your fist. Just press all the modifier keys and then drag, and notice that the handle above is moving closer, or the handle above is moving away. And so that way you get a perspective effect. So it's not effect, that is. So it's not the opposite handle, it's the neighbor. What if you want the neighbor, I'm undoing. What if you want the neighbor to be the other neighbor, like this way? Well, then just start your drag differently. And so this time we are moving the points together horizontally because I have the Control Shift and Alt keys down. Now this is called the perspective effect. It is not a true perspective. Like, we're not actually projecting this onto some kind of perspective plane. Notice that at first we get this, at first we're kind of squishing the bottom of the flying saucer, but then it just kind of scales, and then pretty soon doesn't really scale very well after that. So just you may find it useful, you may not. I'm just going to press the escape key, and what I'm going to tell you is this. In just a little more than a half an hour, I've managed to tell you every which way to use the free transform command here inside Photoshop. All right, I like to think that was a lot. If it wasn't, please let me know so I can make these things more intense. Now, quick plug. Like every fool out there, I have a Patreon. Would you like to learn how to make a synthetic star field like the thing we've been looking at behind the flying saucer all this time? Then check out patreon.com/deeknow. No lie, this technique made its way into Star Wars. But if you are a patron, you'd already know that by now. Next up, let's take a look at how we can make every single transformation absolutely 100% non-destructive using smart objects. All right, now, as I was saying, every transformation, whether scale, rotate, what have you, begins the same way, with the free transform command. So Control T on the PC or Command T on the Mac. But there's one thing I really want you to get in the habit of doing before you press Control or Command T, and that is to convert the layer to a smart object. That way you place it inside of a protective container so that you can't harm it. You won't rewrite a single pixel in that image. And so let me show you what I mean. I'll go ahead and switch over to this guy, of course. Now, very briefly, with this spaceship layer selected, I'll press Control T, Command T on the Mac, just so you can see up here in the options bar, we have those skew values, and we also have interpolation. And I was telling you, you want to set that to Bicubic and leave it set that way. You do not see that option in particular when working with a smart object. And so I'm going to just go ahead and escape out here. And I'll press Control K or Command K on the Mac to bring up the Preferences dialog box. And notice, where am I looking? Oh, it's right here, Image Interpolation. This guy right here, by default, is set to Bicubic Automatic. I urge you to change it to Bicubic, best for smooth gradients. Why it's called that? It's just called that. That's just Adobe decided that would be the best way to understand it. Has nothing to do with smooth gradients. It just does the best job. It is the most reliable interpolation method there is. It doesn't sharpen the image and it doesn't smooth the image. It just goes ahead and blends the pixels as best they can possibly be blended. There's an argument for bilinear, and one day we can discuss this in detail. But for now, if you trust me, go this route and then click OK. So again, just Control K, Command K on the Mac to bring up the Preferences dialog box. All right, now for the smart object part of our entertainment this evening, I'm gonna take this UFO layer right here. Now they're UAPs, but who cares? Anyway, I'm gonna jump it by pressing Control J, Command J on the Mac to jump a copy of it. And there's a reason I'm doing this. You may notice this is not a smart object currently. So the thumbnail does not have a little page icon to show that the image is embedded inside of a smart object, as we'll see in just a moment. That tells us it's a static layer and it will be harmed. The pixels will be rewritten if you apply free transform. In particular, if you scale, rotate, skew, or distort, or apply that perspective thing. All right, so the thing is, before you turn this into a smart object, you might want to take the layer effects, these two layer effects right here, and the mask. In this case, it's a vector-based mask, but it could be a regular layer mask. You may want to take them off, then turn this into a smart object, and then put them back on. That way, they're outside the smart object. You understand? The image that way is the only thing inside the smart object. You'll still be able to get to the mask and to the effects. And so let's say you want to do that. Then you would jump the layer, as I've done, just so that you have everything you need. Also, I'm going to do a little comparison here. I'll right-click on this mask and choose Delete Vector Mask. And then I'll right-click on the word Effects. And this one's a little harder to get to just because it's a longer menu, and choose Clear Layer Style. That'll get rid of those both. Now, with just this item selected, actually turn off the original layer. We'll come back to it. With just this item selected, my favorite way to work is to make sure that the rectangular marquee tool is selected at the top of the toolbox and right-click anywhere inside the image window. And don't choose Free Transform. We'll get to that. We want Convert to Smart Object. So you convert to the smart object before you apply the transformation. That's very important. Now, notice that we're seeing this little embed icon, and that means we've placed the image inside of a protective smart object. Basically, the image has become indestructible. Now, I'll press Ctrl T, Command T on the Mac, and I'll, there's something else I wanted to do. I'll just go ahead. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to put the mask back on, and I want to put the effects back on too, because otherwise we have an unmasked, we don't have a nice composition. So what you do, in order to move the mask, you Alt or Option drag it. So press the Alt key, the Option key on the Mac, and drag that guy upward. Did you see that? I'm going to do that again. Alt or Option drag. See the cursor? It's a little double arrow cursor that tells you you're going to make a duplicate of that mask. And now do the same with the effects. Alt or Option drag them like so. See that duplicate cursor once again? Drop. And now everything's back the way it was before, except you now have the image, which is what counts, inside the smart object. All right. Now, I'll press Ctrl T, Command T on the Mac in order to switch to the free transform mode, or enter the free transform mode, actually. And now I'm just going to do whatever absurd thing I want. Actually, just for the sake of demonstration here, I will make this guy very small. I press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac, so I'm scaling with respect to the center. And now I'll just press the Enter key. Very cavalier. Where'd the spaceship go? Holy moly, it's gotten very tiny, hasn't it? I'll just go ahead and zoom way in on it, and I'm now looking at the image at 800%. And clearly, I have done horrible damage to it. It was just a few pixels. Now, you could probably, if you wanted to and didn't have anything better to do with your time, count them. However, watch this. Just check this out. I'll zoom back out by pressing Control-0, Command-0 on the Mac. Press Control-T, Command-T on the Mac, and just make this guy bigger again. Now, at first, it looks like we're in trouble, is what it looks like to me. And that orangeness is from the gradient overlay layer effect right there. But watch, as soon as I press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac, I'm scaling it. Look at the width and height values. They're now 8,000% higher, actually. Now I'll press the Enter key, the Return key on the Mac, and oh my goodness, it's all there. I'll zoom in to 100%. It's looking good. And you're going to have nice, smooth transitions if you did what I asked you to do and you press Control-K or Command-K on the Mac and you switched image interpolation to Bicubic. And then what you want to do, this is so important, by the way. I really believe this with everything in me. This is so important for day-to-day work that after you click OK, after you've made the change and you click OK, you quit Photoshop. Because that's how you save preferences for your next session in Photoshop, is to quit the program. Anyway. All right. Well, that's obviously a great idea. Now then, let's say I do some more stuff. I'll press Control-T, Command-T on the Mac. In order to re-enter the free transform mode, you can do that as many times as you want to, by the way. And now I'm Shift-Alt dragging this time in order to make this guy this goobly thing right here. And I'll press the Enter key, Return key on the Mac to accept that change. Do it all you want. Because all the pixels are protected. You could do this day after day after day. You could make this your life's work. All right, so check this out. If I press Control-T or Command-T on the Mac, I believe I've done this before. I want you to skip here in the options bar. Notice that we're seeing some weird stuff. We're seeing width and height, and we're seeing rotation. Everything's 100 or 0. We're seeing the skew values, which we shouldn't be seeing really. And we're seeing interpolation, which I told you is now dictated by the preferences. Well, let me show you something. That's all wrong. And the problem is, I'll escape out. The problem is that we're linked over here in the layers panel. The smart object is linked to its mask. Unlink it for a second. And then press Ctrl T, Command T on the Mac. Notice interpolation went away, skew went away as well, for what that's worth. And now we're seeing real values. We have a width of 39%, a height of 135% or so, and almost 30% roll, rotation. All right. And then, if I dragged it around, now I would change the rotation value, and that's fine. And it's all concatenated. Basically, it's being calculated on the fly. It's good. In other words, but I didn't link to the mask, so the mask did not get rotated along with it. So if you wanted to make further changes and you want the mask to match, then you would want to link it back together. But it's just that you're going to see wrong information up here in the options bar. So I just want you to know everything that's going on. All right, do you remember if you go to the properties panel? I don't know if you watched my short, but if you go to the properties panel, and you'll see this little guy right there. It's kind of a new icon that says reset transformations, and it will. Now notice these guys are linked together. It will reset, but it doesn't reset the mask. So you see the thumbnail for the image, it's reset. Everything's reset. Shift click on the mask, everything's better, but the mask did not get restored. Now, if you want to work, I like having this kind of flexibility. I like to be able to get to my layer effects and my mask and everything else outside the smart object without having to dig into the smart object, in other words. But if you want to work a little bit differently, you can put everything inside the smart object. So I'll turn this layer off. This is completely up to you which way you want to work. I'll turn this guy on. So here's this flat image, right? I mean, it's not flat. It's a layered image, but it's static pixels. There's its layer mask. It's a vector mask for what's worth. Could be just a pixel-based mask. And we have some layer effects. We could have some other doodads too. Anyway, I'll right-click, once again, choose Convert to Smart Object. Watch what happens over here in the Layers panel. All that stuff disappears. We just have now the masked object, notice that, with this little page icon indicating that everything is now embedded inside the smart object, which means now, Control T, Command T on the Mac, try to make quick work of this. I'm going to do a Shift Alt drag and make it all blobby and rotate it and do all kinds of weird stuff to it, like so. Let's say, and then press the Enter key, Return key on the Mac. Now, if I press Control T, Command T on the Mac, notice, I just want you to see we're in a second session of Free Transform. I'm seeing all the stuff. I'm seeing the width value is 41%. The height is 125 or something. Rotates very close to 30 degrees. Apparently, that's kind of how I roll. Anyway, and so you could change those values to anything you want. And this time, the mask is going to move along with because it's inside the smart object. And then you also have the option, by the way, of bringing back that properties panel and clicking on that icon. And this time it should reset everything because it's all in that same smart object. The only problem is, of course, is if you want to change the mask, if you start looking around and it's got some bad edges or you want to add another layer effect, well, you could add a layer effect to this smart object now if you wanted to. There's a bunch of different ways to work. But if you want to get to that mask, you got to double click on its thumbnail in order to open. Now, notice we're seeing the static image. It doesn't have a little page icon in its corner, and that's because this is the image inside the smart object. This is the contents of the smart object. The smart object is what I mean. And then we also have part of the contents is the vector mask and those layer effects. So you're just going to have to dig a little deeper in order to make, get access to everything. So there's a couple of different ways, but no matter what, I am telling you, I see what I did. I forgot that we now have 3 images open. This is what I want to show you. No matter what, make sure to convert your layer to a smart object before you press Control or Command T. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, I know that was a lot, but believe it or not, it doesn't include all of the also thoughts that were rambling around in my brain. Just take a look at all of these things. If you can make sense of them and any of them interest you, then comment. And don't forget, by the way, that I have a Patreon, and that this week I'm going to show you how to create that synthetic star field that you saw behind the flying saucer as well. By the way, I also featured in the background of the penguins from last week. To learn more, go to patreon.com/deeknow, and then make your way to my very own deek.com, create a free account, and sign up for my newsletter. I'm Deke McClellan. This is Photoshop Now.